November 1836. Finally, it's done. I've sold my half of Vandraven and Morrison to my old partner and friend, Robert Morrison. He's now the proud owner of 20 of the finest clipper ships to ever sail from Southampton. May they serve him well in his future endeavors. As for myself, I am content. My new wife is young, beautiful, and the daughter of a wealthy planter well established in the Jamaicas. Her heritage is old, almost as old as my own, if not quite as prestigious. Accompanying her is a maid, Matilda, a wild creature of mixed heritage. Dusk beauty indeed, who never leaves my wife's side. I believe my manservant Stephen is already in love. We count ourselves lucky to have such glorious company as we undertake the long voyage back to England. December 1836. The new house is a marvel. Sat atop a rearing cliff, it overlooks the dark waves of the Atlantic and the picturesque village of Mavagaz, which sits nestled on the southern coast of windswept Cornwall. On our arrival, we were greeted by Jonathan Wills, builder and architect, who I had, at some expense, commissioned to build the house. After some pleasant trivialities, he took me gently to one side and explained to me some of the extra cost I had incurred during my long absence. Most of these seemed to revolve around compensatory-like matters, as it seemed 2 workers, both men from the village, had died whilst working on the house. One had died after falling from the scaffolding, and the other crushed to death by falling masonry from faulty rigging. Now, I inquired of Wills how this was any concern of mine. After all, the men had been hired legally and paid an honest day's wage for an honest day's labor. Any misfortune that had befallen them through accident, act of God, or their own carelessness was no concern of mine. It was at this point that I first learned of the village's dislike of not only myself, but also that of my new home. Wills informed me, in no uncertain terms, that it would be in my best interest, and a gesture of goodwill, if I was to compensate the grieving widows of both men. After some little thought, I agreed on the condition that he tell me what grievances the village and its denizens had against myself and my new home. He agreed and commenced with telling of his tale. According to Wills, the ground upon which my new house stood was considered by many of the villagers, and others here, and about the general area, as something akin to sacred ground. Something to do with an ancient druid grove and a great circle of stone rings, both of which had been uprooted and destroyed to make room for my new home. The great stones themselves smashed and used in the very foundation of the house itself. This and more he told me until I could contain myself no longer and laughed uproariously in the poor man's face. After some small while I regained my composure and I apologized profusely for my rudeness, all the while explaining that the local fairy tales bothered me not at all, and the opinions of us, a bunch of superstitious locals, bothered me even less. But still, I had to live in this place and do business with the local shopkeepers and merchants, and so I sent Wills on his way with a heavy purse with which to compensate the grieving families of the 2 men. January 1837. Christmas was something of a muted affair. Many of my old friends and acquaintances are situated in London, and we are quite alone here in our own little corner of the world. My wife does not partake of strong drink, as is becoming of a lady. Now, she was somewhat silent and sullen through the whole affair. As for her maid, Matilda, she would not even acknowledge the sacred holiday at all, and I fear she's no true Christian. I stayed up late that night and drank deeply, lonely in my solitude. I even went so far as to drag my poor manservant Stevens from his warm bed before plying him liberally with generous amounts of my finest brandy. We sat there some time before a roaring fire, talking over old times while the wind howled and gibbered outside our window. The last thing I heard as I fell asleep was the roar of the ocean. I did not dream. March 1837. It's been 4 months and 3 days since we moved into the house, and although I have taken my beautiful Elizabeth to bed every night and performed my husbandly duties with great vim and vigor, there's no sign of a child. My beloved tells me these things take time, but I find myself growing more sullen, spending more and more time locked in my study poring over my old ledgers. My wife is strong, young, beautiful, and almost 20 years my junior. I feel our troubles stem from myself, for I have grown old in many years of business, and now I fear shall never sire an heir to continue the sacred name of Vandraven. God save me from such a fate. April 1837. The doctor I sent for arrived only yesterday, and after a lengthy examination of both myself and Elizabeth, and after many searching questions, deemed us both fit and healthy, and could see no reason why children should not be forthcoming in our immediate future. September 1837. The summer was a glorious one, and I had almost forgotten this journal. Our days have been spent frolicking on the local beaches, where we picnicked and swam frequently in the chilly Cornish sea. Our nights spent sipping wine on the veranda, listening to the gentle lapping of the surrounding sea, but for all our happiness and our nightly devotions to one another, there is still no sign of a child. October 1837. God forgive me, for I have sinned. I have drank of vile potions, and I've prayed to dark gods, offering up sacrifice for their favor. It all started with that witch Matilda, who one evening, long after my wife had retired to her bed, approached me where I sat reading by lamplight in my study. She entered silently, and I only noticed her presence when she laid a dusky hand upon my shoulder, causing me to cry out and spill my drink on the book that I had been reading. Leaping to my feet, I cursed her roundly. She took a step back before my anger and curtsied, casting her eyes down demurringly. Yet still it seemed a small smile played across her shapely lips. I demanded she explain why she was sneaking around the house at this ungodly hour instead of attending her mistress, my good lady wife. She informed her mistress was abed and sleeping soundly, and it was now me she intended to serve. Now, baffled, I asked her meaning, but her next question caught me off guard. She asked how badly I wanted a child. And a male one at that. An heir to carry on the Vandraven bloodline. For a moment I was tempted to beat her for her insolence, and even raised my hand to do so, but something in her eyes stilled my hand, causing it to drop limply by my side. Anything, I answered. I would do almost anything for a male heir to carry on the Vandraven name. Nodding, she took my hand, and I marveled at how soft her skin was against my own, as she led me from my study through the kitchen and down the darkened cellar. God, how to describe what waited for me deep in the bowels of my own home. An altar anointed with blood, a sacrifice to some dark and terrible god. Everywhere candles burned, flickering in the eyes of the dead animals that lay all about. Pigeons, doves, cats, even a large black dog lay piled around its base, their blood soaking into the feet of that terrible statue that sat hunched and grotesque. An insult to those of us who dwell in the sane light of day. Its body, while hunched and twisted, resembled that of a man. But that's where anything human in likeness suddenly stopped, for its head was that of a great octopus, scaled with huge, staring eyes, and a mass of withered tentacles covering the lower half of its face. From its gnarled back sprung stunted wings, and its scaled arms and feet were claw-like and webbed. I turned to run, to flee this abomination, but the witch Matilda stood blocking my way. I tried to push past, but she grabbed my arm and spanned me back around to face her, blowing some kind of noxious dust in my face that instantly caused my head to pound and sent my senses reeling. The next thing I knew, we were both naked, kneeling before the bloody altar. The knife was in my hand. God. Oh, God. Stephen's lay dead before me. His throat, a red ruin, his hot blood all over me. Beside me knelt Matilda, chanting, her naked body covered in sweat and blood, as she cried out her devotion to her infernal gods. I tried to rise, but she pushed me back down upon my back and climbed on top of me. From behind her, she pulled a small wooden bowl, brimming with some kind of noxious liquid, which she raised to her lips. Taking the potion into her mouth, she pressed her lips against my own, but I twisted my head to and fro, raising my hands to beat her off, but she caught them easily and placed them upon her heavy breast, letting some of the crimson potion trickle from between her ripe lips down over her heavy, glistening body. In a moment, her lips crushed against mine, spilling the vile poison down my throat. The rest of the night was filled with blurred images as we fornicated amongst the dead, like wild animals biting and tearing at each other, and I, filled with all the vigor of my youth. Until at last I collapsed exhausted, only to awake the very next day battered and bruised in my own bed. So exhausted I was, barely able to move. I called out, and my cry was instantly heeded as a smiling Elizabeth entered the room, carrying a tray as if she had been waiting just outside the door. She asked me how I was feeling as she placed the tray across my lap and told me how they had found me sweating and delirious upon my study floor in the grip of some strange fever. I tried to speak to tell her of the horror, but I only managed a single word. Stevens. Smiling, she patted my hand. Her next words turned my blood cold. Sick, she lied, smiling all the while. Down with the same fever as your own, my love. But don't worry, she said, beginning to spoon-feed me a strange-tasting broth. It will all be over soon. November 1837. Days have passed, maybe even weeks. I am a prisoner laying here in this filthy bed, drugged and alone, only this journal to bear witness to my plight. The witch Matilda came to visit me yesterday, her belly already round and swollen. She took my hand and placed it on her stomach. What a fine son I will have, she grinned. A fine boy who will have a fine name and a fine fortune. A vessel for my master. For now his time has come round once again, and he will walk abroad once more in the land of men. And they will tremble at his coming, for the sleeper has awoken Lucas Vandraven. She stroked my brow almost affectionately. And he will be of one father and two mothers, as it is written in the dark pages of time. I could do nothing but lay there and listen to her ramblings, as she spoon-fed me the intoxicating broth down my throat, her soft chanting lulling me into a drug-fueled sleep. I awoke sometime later in the dark. Perhaps only hours had passed, or even days. It's so hard to keep track of time in this place. The last face I remembered seeing was that of my once beloved Elizabeth, who sat silently by my side, spooning scalding broth between my lips, sometimes to smile at whatever little pain she could cause me. How glad I will be when you are dead, she said, ramming the spoon down my throat until I started to gag and choke. All those nights with your shriveled old body, sweating on me, grunting. How I shuddered at your touch, and still, you couldn't give me a child. Now Matilda has the honor of bringing our master into this world, but he is strong I will need 2 mothers, and I will feel his sacred touch. Feel him growing inside of me, and after, when he is born into this world, I will come for you, Marcus Vandraven." She raised and threw back the scalding covers from my wasted body. She poured the remainder of the scalding broth onto my lap and laughed down at me, where I withered in agony before mercifully passing out. Later, I felt a cold hand pressed against my throat as I swam up through the darkness. "He is alive," the voice of Matilda chimed. "You gave him too large a dose is all. That and the pain you have inflicted upon him." "Why do we bother?" Elizabeth replied. "Let's just kill him and have done with it." "Be silent, you fool," Matilda snapped. "We still may have need for him. Should the ceremony go wrong, we will have to start the whole process all over again." "Starting again." Elizabeth's voice sounded worried. "As he is now, he can barely move, let alone give you another vessel for the master." Matilda laughed a throaty chuckle. "I have potions that can rouse a dead man's passions. Have no fear of that. If all goes well tomorrow night, we shall have no more use for him, and you can kill him yourself. But until that time, leave him alone. No more of your little games." "You promise?" she asked, their voices moving away. "That I can kill him?" Faded now as they closed the door gently behind them. I knew then that I must find a way to stop them. Not only for myself, but also to prevent whatever evil they intended to bring into this world. God, I pray, give me strength. This will be my last entry in this journal. I awoke this very night to the roar of thunder and the flash of lightning outside my window. Seemed I'd slept the entire day away, uninterrupted, and I felt somewhat better for that. Faded was the leaden feel in my limbs, and my mind felt clear and sharp for the first time in many days. It seemed Elizabeth had heeded the witch Matilda's words and had left me alone, or perhaps they were busy with whatever evil they were planning, and they'd forgotten about me. Either way, my prayers had been answered, and I felt stronger than I had in days. Now free from the effects of whatever terrible drug they had been feeding me. Rousing myself, I sat up, wincing at the stiffness in my limbs as I slowly rose to my feet, leaning against the bedpost as a wave of dizziness assaulted my senses. After a few deep breaths, the room stopped its spinning and I was able to gather my senses about me once again. Staggering over to my dresser, I quickly dressed before heading to the door. My hand had just started to turn the handle when the chanting started, and suddenly the air felt charged with electricity, making it hard to breathe, causing my scalp to tighten and the skin of my arm to crawl with great knots of goose flesh. For a moment I considered running, leaving this place for the damn forever. But I could not. Whatever evil was afoot, I had played my part in it. For was it not my very essence that was being used, manipulated to bring something unspeakable into the world? Strengthening my resolve, I took a deep breath and I threw open the door, expecting to be greeted by all the denizens of hell, but there was only a darkened corridor lit by flashes of lightning, crash of thunder that seemed to accompany the hellish chanting like some terrible drum. The air felt thick and heavy as I continued on down the hall, past the library and drawing room, till at last I stopped outside my wife's dressing room and, with trembling hands, threw open the door. They were both there, lying upon the floor, facing each other, completely naked, their legs splayed wide open, their ankles entwined. The room was lit by hundreds of candles, and there was blood everywhere. It lay in puddles upon the hardwood floor and ran in rivulets down the walls. Even the ceiling dripped with a crimson rain, splashing and hissing against the burning candles, splattering and showering the 2 chanting women. I watched on in horror as Matilda's ripe stomach started to heave and twist. She had time to let out a single ear-piercing shriek before her stomach suddenly exploded, bathing Elizabeth's lower half in blood and gore as the creature inside her clawed and heaved its way out. I let out a wail of despair as the creature more fully emerged, for I had seen this thing before, carved in stone deep in the bowels of my own home. For this was Matilda's dark god brought to life by our terrible union. At the sound of my cry, Elizabeth noticed my presence for the first time, raised her blood-covered face and hissed at me, her eyes filled with hatred as if daring me to come closer. Now the creature was free and slowly crawling towards her waiting flesh. A laborious umbilical cord trailing behind it, eager to be in its new host, hidden away from the world where it could continue to grow and consolidate its power. Quickly, I looked for something, anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell upon a basket full of knitting. With a cry of triumph, I leapt forward and snatched up 2 slender wooden needles and ran across the room, but it was too late. It was too late. The creature was gone, hidden away, buried deep inside of my once beloved Elizabeth. Only the trailing umbilical cord remained. Steeling myself, I made a grab for it, snatching it up. At once my skin began to burn and blistered where the thing twisted and writhed in my hand. With a cry of fear and outrage, I heaved with all of my might, aborting the hateful thing back into the world. I did not stop or even think, but thrust the wooden needles down, driving them deep through the creature's strange flesh, pinning it in place. It let out a scream, a screech that only the true damned could ever muster, shriveling my poor, shrunken soul, reverberating through the halls of my mind. And then it lay still, the glow fading from its glaring yellow eyes once again. Cheated, banished back to whatever strange hell it had come from. Now Elizabeth was climbing to her feet. "The Master!" she cried. "Oh, Lucas, what have you done to our son?" But I let her say no more. Grabbing her by the hair, I reached down and yanked the needles from our now dead abomination and thrust them upward, under her chin, into the soft flesh of her throat. Her eyes widened, and she staggered back, gurgling and tugging at them, widening the wound till blood poured like a river down her body, mixing with the already blood-soaked floor, causing her to slip and fall, sending her crashing into a nearby dressmaker's dummy, which she clung to, trying to find her balance, but it was too late. Her legs gave way, and she dragged the thing down on top of her, pinning her beneath, as she convulsed and writhed, reaching out towards me, her fingers clutching, pleading, begging, but I turned my face from her. When I looked back, it was finally over. And so it's ended, and only I remain. I've written all through the long night. At last the sun rises, driving back the darkness. But it can never drive away the darkness within the stain upon my soul. I shall go to the cliff's edge now. I shall take my only son and heir with me. Together we shall travel through the dark waters. May God have mercy on our souls. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and thank you for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's podcast, and thank you for clicking the thumbs up, the subscribe, the follow, the bell, the whatever helpful thing there is on such a platform. If you want to find your nice Halloween horror audiobook to listen to this year, check out audible.com and look for MrCreepyPasta, because I got a whole bunch of books over there. Books like Tales from the Gas Station. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who is supporting me on Patreon. If you guys have been supporting me on Patreon, or if you're considering doing so, then know that I just added in a couple of cool things for the loyalty program because I found out that I could. I had no idea that I could do that. So now, you guys should be getting some cool things in the mail brought to you by Patreon that are pretty cool. They support the channel as well. Oh, getting to the point though, a huge thank you to patrons such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Brian Arce, Bobby Karman, Stephanie Butler, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, William King, Heather McDonald, Reaper61167, Alex the Sandwich, Darth Miver, Micah Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Ness69420, aisodoehtraed with 2 exclamation points, Nessie, Ronnie Hansen, Bardohawk764, Melancholy Corpse, Ferb, Harley, Billy Morrow, Madam Skullbunny, Sashi Suzaku, Grizzly Olsen.pro, Caden the Spooky Boy, Zane Nightshade, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Ashwood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Miss Alexandra, Mr. Unsettling Spaghetti, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Fried Chicken 12, Freddy Krueger, Pie Nanny, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Elves, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nina Smith, Nico Cayo, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trace Miles, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys so much, so much for being a part of the Patreon and helping me keep the lights on and helping me get exclusive stories and everything that we do on the channel here. Thank you guys so much for being a part of it. Thank everybody in the description, and thank you guys who have stayed to this part of the video. It really means so much to me. I hope you all have a very happy Halloween and sweet dreams.